Microphone. All right. I wish everybody a very good afternoon. I hope all of you are doing very well, as you should, for the presentation by Professor Yanbai about the experiences of Japanese Americans during World War II. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Professor Bai, who is not only my colleague, but my friend too. He got his Masters of Public Administration from Seton Hall University in New Jersey. He received his PhD from Texas Tech University. And in the department, he teaches mostly comparative politics, international politics, and courses devoted to Asian politics. So give a warm round of applause to Professor Yanbai.
On the 7th of December, 1941, the Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese Imperial Navy and Army too. So there was a fear, folks, at that time. The fear was that the Japanese army would launch a full-scale attack on the west coast of the United States. And that threat was so imminent. Really, the fear was so strong. So there were lots of... Where's that? I got some photos. Anyway, the fear was that the Japanese would attack pretty soon along the west coast of the United States. So there were many people who lived there, Americans, who asked government to do something about the Japanese who lived there too. There was a huge Japanese community. As you may know, 90% of Japanese who migrated to the United States live in California. 90%, which was about 130,000 people. So the government responded to this fear by asking the Japanese people in the communities to stay where they were. They were not allowed actually to go far. They were not allowed to use the radio when they were fishing on the waters. There were also a curfew at night. Eventually, in 1942, actually that's February the 19th, the President Roosevelt issued the executive order to relocate the Japanese Americans out of the West Coast and move them to the inner area, the inland area, the inland states like Wyoming, Idaho, Arizona. So this is order, and this order is called the Executive Order 1966. And this year, as you know, this year is now 2012, and this is the 70th anniversary of this order. Okay, I'm going to move this. Pretty much the West Coast was declared as the military zone, which was prohibited for the civilians. Civilians could not enter, especially the Japanese. Japanese could not do very much. They were considered as a danger, a potential danger. Because when the Japanese landed, I mean, if that's the case, if they launched the attack, if they land on the West Coast, the native Japanese Americans could help these people, I mean, soldiers. The local Japanese people could assist the Japanese soldiers in doing whatever they do, I mean, in aggression, right, in the combat battles. So they have to go. They have to move, they have to be moved to far away in the inland areas. Now, they were not given like lots of time to prepare to leave. They were just given like 48 hours They had to carry whatever they could. Since there were just 48 hours, they could not do much about their properties, their houses, their farms. So most of the houses or properties or farms were sold at a huge loss. Yes, another thing is out of 120,000 Japanese Americans, about 2/3 of them were the citizens of the United States. They were the citizens, right? They were not the aliens. This is the order issued by the commander of the Western Coast West Civilian Commander. His name is General DeWitt. General DeWitt was very much anti-Japanese. He pretty much he despised Japanese. He resented Japanese. He said Japanese people could not be assimilated. Japanese people could not be taught to be loyal to the United States. So this one was issued, signed by him, and that's circulated throughout the communities right along the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington. Look at the map. I mean, the sign just keeps moving. At that time, to be honest, the internment of the Japanese Americans was very popular among the white farmers. Why that? At the first half of the 19th century, 20th century, I should say, the Japanese moved to the United States. As I said, most of them settled in California. So there was a competition, between the Japanese Americans and the Americans, Native American, white Americans, especially among the farmers, fishermen. The competition was so fierceful. So if the Japanese farmers were relocated, there would be no competition. Life would be better for the white farmers. Now, this is a remark made by a gentleman named Austin Anson. Okay. The next one is some of them were arrested. They were arrested by the Justice Department or FBI. They were arrested and accused for espionage. Not many, but some of them were arrested. Yeah, and then they were rounded up. They must go within 48 hours. They got to board the buses. Sometimes they were put onto the trains, and train would take them to, those states. This is a very familiar photo. I think everybody has seen this photo before. This is the family, parents and the children. Children, just before they were relocated, they were studying together. They would go to the same school, and they would, pledge the allegiance to the United States. But next day, they have different fate. And this kid was on the path to a different future. So was this little girl. Some Japanese Americans challenged the executive order, by the president. I mean, you can see, the sign of defiance. I'm an American. How could you treat me like this? If the United States protects the civil liberties of the citizens, then I'm a citizen. Right? So that's a check. Okay, this is the internment camp. This is the camp. Now, the terminology can be very controversial. Some people say the internment camp is like concentration camp. We don't use the word concentration, although some political leaders use that word during the war. But as the concentration camps in the Europe became so bad, the connotation of concentration would not be so appropriate. So we don't, right? The word concentration was not used. It's not used even today. We use internment, right? Internment camps. Actually, there are three terms: assembly center, relocation center, and internment center, or assembly camp, relocation camp, and internment camp. Anyway, as you can see, the conditions of the camp were so bad. It was built by the civilians as the order of the military. It was very primitive. There was no, cooking facilities. There was no, right? It's not like a house. It's barrack with barbed wires. They got armed soldiers, watching them. They are being watched, 24 hours every day. It's also crowded, very crowded, because it's the barrack. It's used for the soldiers. It's not built for the families. So as you can see, right? They could not live outside the fences. They must stay within. A few people were shot and killed because they were trying to go out, but that's not allowed. That's the family. Do you know this person? Yeah. He was like, how old? He was like 6 years old. His dad took him to the internment camp. He lived there throughout his childhood. He remembered this. We were going too fast. So the debate on the executive order on 1966. Well, again, we are divided. Some people say, that's war. It's wartime. So this order what was done under this order was necessary. Especially we got this Alien Enemies Act of 1798. President Roosevelt acted by following this act. So there's nothing wrong about he issuing the order to relocate the aliens of the enemy country. This act, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, is still in place. It is still being enforced. Pros, I mean, again, some people are still in defense of the executive order. Some people still think the internment of the Japanese Americans was necessary. It's war. War is very much different from peacetime. Wartime is not the same thing as peacetime. So if you follow this, if you do this as told by this act, there's nothing wrong about it. Now, some other people say, not just Japanese Americans who were interned, Italian Americans, German Americans, they were also interned, right? They were also incarcerated, and they were also treated the same way as the Japanese Americans. How come, there was nothing that's going on about these people? As a matter of fact, there is a huge difference. Yes, some German Americans were interned, but not many. Some Italian Americans were also interned, but again, not many. For the Japanese, it's like 100%. All of the Japanese Americans were forced to leave their homes and go to those states. For the German Americans, it's only 4%. 4% of the German Americans were interned, which is like, let me put it this way, 11,000 German Americans were arrested during the war. I mean, again, what if these people would help the enemies? So 11,000 German Americans were arrested, but only 5,000 of the total who were arrested were interned. For the Italian Americans, there were about 300 Italian Americans were interned. So if you look at the number, which is so small, right? The number as compared to 120,000. It's not just individuals, it's not just the number of individuals, it's community. The entire community of the Japanese Americans were uprooted. So sometimes we call that dislocation. It's not just relocation, it's dislocation. They got no home. The community, the neighborhood was gone. So again, some folks use the experience of German Americans, Italian Americans to justify that the internment of the Japanese Americans was not a big deal. It is a big deal. Just look at the size of the community, the number of people who were involved. For the Japanese Americans in Hawaii, well, not many people were interned because Pearl Harbor has happened already. So only a few thousand Japanese Americans in Hawaii were interned, and they were interned right in Hawaii. They were not like relocated, right? So we're talking about the Japanese Americans along the West Coast, and they suffered so much. But anyway, we got pros and cons. This is the one of the pros for the internment of the Japanese American. At that time, by the way, the Japanese Americans were defined as Japanese, as a person of the Japanese descent with one of 16 blood. Whoever has one out of 16 is a Japanese. Also, Japanese would be extended to the Koreans. Koreans, because Korea was a colony of Japan. So whoever from Korea was also interned. People from Taiwan, Taiwanese were again the people who were colonized by the Imperial Japan. So they were also interned, right, along with the Japanese, Japanese aliens, Japanese, right, nationals. So it's quite a big, community, big scope of the people. Another thing is this: not many people know this. The United States government has gone out of its border to Latin American countries. They went there. What did they do there? They asked the governments there, about 15 countries, 15 national governments in South America, assisted the United States government by forcing the Japanese residents in those countries out of their countries and send them to the United States. And the number is about 6,000. So we got Japanese Americans not from the United States. We also got the Japanese Americans from Peru, Brazil, Mexico. And they were also forced to stay in the United States during the war. 6,000. So you may wonder, why do we do that? I mean, what's the purpose? I mean, why do we go such a long way to get them out of those countries and bring them back here? For what purpose? Here, the last one. We keep them there for what? For the purpose of, right, prisoner exchange. Yeah. They got our POW, they got our soldiers, they got our servicemen. I mean, they put them there in their camps, right? We want to use the Japanese reading here to exchange American POWs. The Canadian government did the same thing, not just the United States. Canadian government also interned the Japanese Canadians there. Well, in the same token, I mean, Japan interned all the white people in Japan. Britain interned Germans and Italians. So every country did quite much the same thing. There were 4 Supreme Court cases, the 4 Supreme Court decisions about the constitutionality of incarcerating the Japanese Americans. Now, this is one of the famous one, Korematsu versus the United States. Fred Korematsu did not go. He didn't go to the concentration camp internment camp. He remained in California. So he was in trouble. But he challenged the law. He challenged the executive order. He challenged by using his constitutional rights. He said he was a citizen of the United States. He got every right not to be treated like that. He made the case was appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court did not support him. The Supreme Court sided with the US government. The Supreme Court said, yes, this is the wartime. This is wartime. So government can do things which were not so ordinary. Extreme measures, extraordinary measures could be imposed, like internment. He lost the case. Yes, the executive order 1966 is the violation of the civil liberties. It bypassed the constitutional safeguards of the citizens of the United States in the name of national security. And also the internment was based on what? Racial profiling. It is the massive racial and ethnic profiling. It's not based on the evidence. I mean, if you did something wrong, I mean, you could be prosecuted. But there was nothing that can prove, the Japanese Americans had done something which is criminal, right? Everything was based on the suspicion. They might do that. There is a possibility, there is a potential they might do that. They might help, the enemies. The enemies might invade our country, that kind of thing. In other words, the executive order is just wrong, totally wrong. The order was rescinded, canceled, or withdrawn by President Ford in 1976. In 1980, President Carter signed legislation into the law to create a commission on wartime relocation and internment of civilians. And this commission was appointed to conduct an investigation, a study, to see the impact of the internment on those civilians. That's 1980. The Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians compiled a study here. The study, the report was called the Personal Justice Denied. I mean, there's a copy in the library. It's like a book. That's the report as a result of the study by the Commission. Personal Justice Denied, a big book. It concluded that the incarceration of Japanese Americans had not been justified by military necessity. There's no such need. In fact, we know now, actually we knew at that time too, the Japanese strategy was not so much about invading the United States. The Pearl Harbor strike was not the primary. I mean, the Pearl Harbor was not the primary target, let me put it this way. Pearl Harbor was the secondary target. The primary target for Japan at the time was Dutch Indies, which is today's Indonesia, the Philippines, because that's where the oil was. They wanted to cripple the US naval fleet so that the United States could not block the ceilings for Japan. So attacking Pearl Harbor was not the prelude, to attack the mainland of the United States. It's just a tactic to force the United States to negotiate to leave Japan alone in Asia. The primary target, again, was the Philippines, Singapore, Taiwan, China, those countries. They wanted oil. They wanted energy. So there's no such planning to attack the United States. Okay, yeah. The report also recommended a compensation, reparation. The amount of money is $20,000 for each person, for each surviving Japanese American. That's the result of this study. In 1988, President Reagan signed a new act, a new law, that's the Civil Liberty Act. That act, I should say, that law confirmed the findings of the study, that's commission. Next year, in 1989, President Bush, the senior, signed an appropriation bill to promise the Japanese Americans that each person, each survivor, would receive the money, the redress payment. Yes, between 1990 and 1998, each person got a check from the U.S. government. I would point it out that this is not the only reparation to the Japanese Americans. There were some other compensation programs to repay the loss to them, properties, homes, throughout that period of time after the war. But this is the money regardless of anything. It's just the money for each person, not for property. That's the token of apologies by the government. Did the government give the money to the interned German Americans or the interned Italian Americans? The answer is no. Only Japanese Americans got money. And then before George W. Bush left his office, he signed this law, perhaps the last one, to allocate $38 million to preserve the facilities of internment in those states. For what? For public education. We use them to teach to our children about what we did in the past. $38 million for preservation, and for the redress payment, that's $1.6 billion in total, this one. The total for this one is $1.6 billion. This one is 38. So are we okay so far? Okay. Now, yes. This is a very controversial issue. Some people still, even today, think that the Japanese were not loyal. The Japanese people could not be assimilated because of their strong national identities. Anyway, in 1943, the government conducted a survey. They gave them questionnaires to the internees, right, in those camps. There were two questions in the questionnaires, which were very vague and poorly worded. Question number 27 and question number 28. So let's take a look. Now, the thing is, if you don't answer yes to either of these two questions, question number 27 and question number 28, you'll be classified as being disloyal to the United States. Now, in 1947, why did United States government conduct this survey? That's because we would need people to fight. There was a need for manpower to join the army. So they thought about recruiting the Japanese, who were interned there. There were many young second-generation Japanese, male, able-bodied, strong. They wanted to get them. That's one of the motives, right? Another motive is to keep tapping off the sentiments, feelings of the internees. So they wanted to do this to check out. Look at these two questions and see, imagine how you would answer these questions. Suppose you were the Japanese, you put yourself into their shoes. Question number 7 is, are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty? Well, it's easy to say yes, right? For young guys, yes, why not? Second question is, the second one is especially vague. I think, do you think that poses like an outward dilemma? The second question, question number 28. Will you swear unqualified allegiance? Unqualified is, unchanged, unmodified allegiance, loyalty to the United States. That's part of the question. That's the first part. The second part of the question is, do you also forswear what? Any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese emperor? So, what's the problem, folks? Can you see the problem in this question? Forswear means to renounce. Okay, let me show you. Question 27. Does that make sense? For the 57 years old, that's the average age. Would you bear an arm to serve in the army, fight in the battle? More likely you would say no. Well, if you say no, you are not loyal. So that means internment of you is justifiable. You are not loyal. Why should you stay, in the West Coast? You should be staying here. Question number 28. Again, you read this, forswear assumed an existing loyalty already to the Emperor of Japan. How would you answer this? If you answer yes, if you say no to 28, no, right? If you say no because there is assumption of your prior loyalty to the emperor, you're saying no to the loyalty to the United States. That's very awkward. Now, if you say yes to the United States, you want to be, a good citizen. Yes, you want to say yes, but you also say yes to what? You also say yes to agree with the pre-existing assumption, which is you are loyal to your emperor already, right? So these two parts, the question has two parts. Usually, one question asks one question, just one part in one question. But this question is double worded. Now, the second one about question 28 is that, as you know, in the 1920s, the first half of the 20th century, many Asian immigrants were not allowed to apply for the citizenship. Asian Americans, Japanese, Chinese, they were not allowed to become American citizens. They were not allowed to marry, interracial marriage. Right? They were forced to pay more in taxations. So the second question is, they were not the citizens of the United States. The only citizen they got was the citizen of their home country. Japan, right? So they didn't want to renounce the only country they belong to, which they have citizenship. So they don't want to be the stateless. Anyway, as a result of this, about 5,500 Japanese Americans who were interned were regarded as disloyal because they answered no. They answered no to question 27. Are you willing to fight for the country? No. They answered no to question 28. You don't want to swear, your loyalty to the United States government? No. If you say no, again, if you say no to any of these two questions, you'll be out. So 5,500 Japanese Americans answered no. About 3,000 of them were repatriated, deported to Japan. So have you noticed that it's like, you're suffering already. Now you're being insulted. We always say, America's special, American exceptionalism. Mainly that's because, we agree that American people appreciate, freedom, democracy, we're the city on the hill. But by the French reporter, thinker, during 1850s, he wrote the book, Democracy in the United States. Now, in that book, he described that racism was kind of common, in the United States, but democracy was also thriving, in this new country. So he believed racism should be put aside. Racism in the United States should be treated separately. We don't talk about racism. It's part of the life. It's not a big deal, right? So that's his observation. Racial problem, existed in the United States, but somehow it won't affect, this great country's image, right? Democratic system. So that's beginning, at the beginning, that's how we perceive racial problem. It's not a big deal. Right? Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. We got 44 presidents. 4 non-president owned slaves. That, right? Thomas Jefferson owned have several hundred slaves. So in his eyes, it's right? We don't talk about it. It's right? That's a long time ago, right? Tocqueville's observation, perception. Today, yes, again, racial problem is a big issue today. I'm sorry, this one should be, this one should be ahead of that one. Okay, anyway, let me back to the internment camps. Again, about 20,000 young Japanese Americans finally joined the armed forces and fought for the United States. Now, that's the famous 442nd Infantry Regiment. Maybe you have heard of this. It's a movie. It's called Go for Broke. It's an old classical movie in 1951, Go for Broke. And that is approval. That is actually proof of the Japanese loyalty to the United States. They fought hard in Europe. Of course, they were not sent to Japan. They were sent to European countries. They fought to death, right? The 442nd about 20,000 Japanese men and women. And this regiment was the highly decorated regiment. And yes, after the war, I should say before the nuclear bomb was dropped, February 1945, the government thought that the internment of the Japanese Americans was no longer needed. So the Japanese could go, they could leave and go back to their homes. So everybody was given $25 and a free train ticket. Now, of course, when they went back, when they returned to California, what did they find? What did they still have in there? Nothing. Nothing. All of the properties, homes, shops, stores, all of them, what they were taken, they were looted. They were taken by other people. So that's actually this picture should be arranged before this one. Anyway, from Tocqueville's racial exclusion to the idea of colorblind law, that is this. Today, yes, from the same case, Korematsu versus United States, we have the same, in the same decision, we have this test. How do we treat the United States citizens? What is the ideal of colorblind law? I mean, again, a long time ago, race was not discussed. No, that's part of the life. Now we're talking about that. We're discussing about this. But what is the standard should we compare? The reality, right? Up to which standard we have this test? This is our test. This is our standard, and this standard comes from Korematsu versus United States. The assumption is that if you don't want to treat people by just looking at the person's skin color, you have to treat that person as an individual. You do not categorize people. If we say we're American citizens, there's no such need to say you're African American. If we are just American citizens before the law, there is no such need to give you a label like white American, African American, Asian American. So there's no need, there is no such necessity to categorize people, to classify people on the basis of race. That's how we treat people. That's the ideal. That's why we say the law is colorblind. In my eyes, when I look at you, I see what? I don't see your color. I see you as a person, an individual, a citizen. But somehow we cannot reach this ideal. Somehow we have to categorize people. Somehow we have to treat people differently. Okay, if government has to categorize people by race, the government has to demonstrate what? The government has to show that there is a public need. Right? The government has to show that there is a compelling public interest, like affirmative action. So the thing is, if any government's policy that contains the categorization of a race, that should be wrong. That's a suspect. If government, treats people differently just simply because people look differently, that's wrong. That's not constitutional. Now, that will be scrutinized. That will be examined by the judiciary, the court. That's a due process. That's called a strict scrutiny. Right? The first step is the suspect. The second one is strict scrutiny. And the third step, the third part, is compelling public interest. So you have to demonstrate, you have to prove that there is something that is overwhelmingly important. So that's how we do it. Otherwise, that's racial profiling. That's wrong. I don't know. Let me see. Is this one okay? Oh, sorry.
When did they send the Japanese away from the internment camp?
In 1945, they started sending them back in February 1945. The last camp that was closed, that's 1946. 1946, the last one. I'm sorry,
Would you say that one of the reasons why the Japanese were put in the internment camps so much more frequently than the German and Italian Americans would be mostly because, or at least in part of, as most Japanese Americans were located in California?
That's one of the reasons. It's easier to remove them because they were so concentrated, whereas German Americans were so scattered. The community was so huge. That's one of the reasons. The second reason was really that the Japanese Americans or aliens were perceived as very much stubborn. They were not willing to be integrated. That kind of thing. The cultural differences. I think
I can understand it's a very proud culture, and I have very much admiration for it.
Yeah.
If you have a question, raise your hand, and either Professor Vrusich or myself will come with the microphone so we can capture this on the tape, okay? So is there any other questions?
I would like to add that racial profiling is like, if you say, okay, just my people were treated that way, whereas the majority was not treated that way, you might say that's racial profiling. Racial profiling is like, just one group was targeted. Like Japanese were targeted and treated so miserably. Yeah.
Yes, there is one question over there. I'll be there with the microphone. Who has the question?
When the Japanese Americans were getting their businesses back and getting money back from the U.S.,
California government compensated some Japanese Americans by giving them some money. Most properties were just gone. Another thing is some Americans, Japanese Americans, were not the owners of the land. They were not allowed to own the land. They were just tenants. So they didn't lose properties, but they lost their jobs.
so the business owners that owned businesses before all this happened, they didn't get any of their property or anything
they were
back?
just gone. The government told the returned Japanese Americans, if you got the written papers, written records, you can bring them to the government, and we'll give you the land, properties, But the many Japanese government, Americans did not have the papers because, in 48 hours, folks, you have to think what to bring with you. Could you think of bringing your papers with you? The documents, the deeds. No, there's no way to think of these kind of things. Everybody was so uncertain of the future. Nobody was thinking of coming back someday. So if you got a no written record, there's no proof. Your property is gone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Video.
I was just curious, what was the attitude like towards the Chinese Americans that were, in the same time period? Was that
during the war, World War II? Chinese Americans, Chinese were the allies of the United States, so they were not interned. China and United States were on the same side during the war, World War II. But before World War II, I mean, Chinese Americans were treated so bad. I mean, but that's a different topic.
How did the U.S. How did the U.S. obtain the authority to go into Latin nations and deport people that weren't U.S.?
They asked. I don't think they really asked. They told those countries, about 15 countries in Latin America, that again the same reason, same rationale. That's the war. For the national security, we need you to deport the Japanese who live in your country to my country. And those countries would do so because they were afraid of the United States. Also, they got the same interest. What if Japanese take control of the United States? The next step would be Latin Americans. So, yeah, they will help. They will assist by sending them to the United States. Yeah. Yeah.
It's been a really long time since the war. Does Japan as a country still hold resentment for the Japanese Americans that fought in the war?
The Japanese in Japan? Well, yeah, it depends on whom you ask, but some Japanese think they are the victims of the war. I mean, to us, Japan invaded, United States. I mean, Pearl Harbor. They bombed us. They, right? They killed people. They invaded, Asian countries in China, Korea. But to some Japanese people, they were victimized by the nuclear weapons at the end of the war. So every 15th of August, every year they hold rallies to say they will never forget. But it's not like they will never forget how they invade other countries. It's that they will never forget how they were bombed by the United States. Yeah.
How much of this can be connected to the actual implementation of the executive order as opposed to the order itself?
Okay, the president has the privilege to issue the orders, the executive orders. Executive orders are not like the legislations. Executive orders are used to deal with, like emergency, special occasions. Now, this executive order per se is groundless. I mean, today we know that, right? It is based on the fear, hysteria, and that's wrong. But again, this order is not, it's just rescinded, it's not invalidated. The executive order 1966 is not, invalidated or canceled. It's just taken back. It's not being enforced. So another thing is this. I think the important thing is the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. That one is still in place. So government can use this one to justify, I don't say internment, but treating people on the basis of race at the time of war. You are the aliens from the enemy country. You should go with me. You're a threat. Who knows? So this one gives the president the justification to issue orders, to relocate or dislocate, things like that. So that's the key. Yes?
How much of the executive order would you say was for the protection of them because of Americans being very aggressive towards the Japanese after the bombing?
By Roosevelt? Or which president?
Before the executive order, like when they were deciding if they were going to make this order?
The president issued not just this order. President Roosevelt issued some other orders, but to the same purpose. There were some other bills which passed in the Congress to do the same thing. So there were quite some orders, not just this one is the key one. This is from the president, but there are some others from government agencies, commissions, to limit the Japanese Americans. in what they are doing at the time.
Are there any other questions? If not, thank you, Professor Bai, for a very interesting presentation.